Hello folks, this is Founder Leveroon. It's been a few days. I just took a little rest, and today I'm going to go over some map tiles that Chris McDermott or Game Tile Warehouse 2020 put out recently. They are very cool. This is an Atlantis series that he put out as a quick Kickstarter. These are exclusive to the Kickstarters for now until he decides to release them to public. Right now, he's probably working on another project, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how these look in Fantasy Grounds and how I would incorporate them and import them, those sort of things. So, first things first, I have a fresh copy of Fantasy Grounds Unity going. I am using the 5th edition rule set. I have the basic SRD rules loaded in the library, and that's about it. So, what I'm going to do is import some images from my computer into Fantasy Grounds. So there are some map packs that are different sizes. Some have tiles, some are for Roll20. I'm going to use the medium tiles and the assets themselves. So the first thing I'm going to import is the tiles. So what I'm going to do is go to Assets, and in the Assets area, I'm going to make sure that I'm in Images, which I am, and then I'm going to click on Folder. And what that'll do is bring me to the back end, and in this campaign setting, it's in the Fantasy Grounds campaigns, and the name of this campaign is Atlantis Maps, and then there's an image folder. So on my hard drive, I've organized all the maps by size and by type. So I'm just going to copy over the medium size maps, so they're not, too small, but they're not too high quality where it's going to cause memory issues. So all I'm going to do is take the folder that I organized initially, and I'm going to take and put a folder in the Images Assets folder in Fantasy Grounds. So these maps will be exclusive to only this campaign. I won't be able to easily copy them from there unless I direct to that folder, and then I also would have to copy those over into the main one. But for now, I'm just going to use it in this campaign. So I'm copying and pasting the images from one folder to the other in the back of Fantasy Grounds. So what will happen is those folders will show up. I don't want to bring the assets over yet because I might use those for tokens, or they might just be assets, so I don't need to necessarily make or import those as a separate image. The only thing I really want to deal with at the moment are the maps. So once I have that over, and when I'm in Fantasy Grounds, I'm going to hit this refresh folder, and when you're in the images category, you should see another folder appear which will say campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the little circular thing on the bottom of the frame here under assets, and it's going to look through my directories, and there is the campaign folder that I was telling you about. So if you double click that, now I have a folder called Atlantis Maps, and these are the medium-sized ones as far as quality and pixels. So if I double-click that, or take it a second to open up the folder and display a thumbnail of each map that's in that pack. So I'm going to go ahead and take a quick look at these. I'll expand it a little bit, and as you can see, it's imported all the different varieties of maps. And these particular ones are medium because Chris usually puts out 4 or 5 different variations. So if you use the medium ones, those are pretty decent. They're not too large, yet they still retain most of their quality when you zoom in. So now that I have all the maps here, instead of dragging these over one at a time, which you can do, I'm going to import all of them at once. So this is why I only put the maps I'm going to use first, because I don't want to import 50,000 maps. I only just want this group of medium ones. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create from Campaign Assets. And it's going to say, are you sure? And I'm going to say, yep. And you give it a couple seconds, and it will pull all those over. So it even tells you here, it says that the folder assets was refreshed. And if you look over to the right now, I have imported all of the different iterations of this map in one click instead of dragging them one at a time. So that's a nice little shortcut. If you have scattered files, you can click on Import Files and look all over your computer for files, but these were all in the campaign folder, and that made it much easier to put these in. So what you have now is a list of maps that come from this set, and if you notice this little M at the end, that means medium. So these are all the medium-sized maps. Now the next step I'm going to do is go back to that folder where I put the maps And I'm going to bring over the assets separately because I don't necessarily want to import those as assets for the map window. I want to use them in maps, but I don't need a separate image for each individual one. So I'm going to copy and paste that assets folder, and I'm going to hit the refresh down here at the bottom of the asset frame. And again, I'm in the images folder, and I just hit refresh. You'll get a little message in the chat window that says it was refreshed. And now I'm going to go back to the campaign folder, and you'll notice that now there's two different bags here. So I'm going to double click on the assets, and once I'm in there, I can preview all the different assets that go to this map set. So these are things that Chris provided in case you want to customize your maps a little bit more. He's even provided the shadows for the creatures, for the sharks and stuff. So this is pretty cool. And then he's got some really cool kind of futuristic but ancient magic type stuff, or some kind of icons or artifacts. There's some strange plants. There's some glyphs. He's got some glowing mechanical things. So anything you could think of that would help you modify or enhance your existing maps, he's actually provided us with a variety of things to look at. So this is just a way to organize your content before you start using your maps. It's important if you're going to be using maps outside of Fantasy Grounds. The real thing is they want you to use the assets that are built into Fantasy Grounds. But if you really want to use PNG files and third-party content, this is how you bring those in. And once they're in this folder, they're pretty much a good deal. They're pretty golden. Since these are imported, I can technically make this a module and export it and create it for myself and load it in other campaigns. Or I can talk to Chris maybe, and maybe he'll want me to put some line of sight on them so he can put them on the store, whatever. But nonetheless, this is how you import them. So I'm going to close the asset. Well, actually, I don't want to close that yet. I want to go back to the campaign folder. And you can see there's the two folders that I had. So I'll just move this aside, go back to the assets, and kind of just minimize this so that it doesn't take so much room. And it'll be okay over here in the corner. So that's the assets that go with here. And then now I have all the maps imported. So let's take a look at the garden passage. So the garden passage looks like a walkway that probably leads to the civilization of Atlantis. And as you can see, it's real small right now. So what I've done is I've taken and expanded this map window out. And there's a little drop down on the top right called Toggle Toolbar. So if you drop that down, you have a few more options here. I'm going to click on Zoom to Fit, and that will bring in this particular image more to scale and to size. And now I'm going to scale the window closer to the size of the image. So this is a horizontal image. So I'm going to scale it horizontally. And then I'm going to stretch it out a little bit more so I have more room. And then once you lock it, this little side panel goes away. So then as you see, I don't need to make it this wide. So I can go ahead and scrunch it down a little bit. And I will use this Zoom to Fit, and that should be pretty good. Then when you want to scale, you just click on the map after it's locked and just roll your mouse wheel forward and backwards. Or you can hold down your middle mouse button and drag the map to any orientation you want, and then release it once you're done. You can also right-click on the map itself, go to View, and then you have Zoom to Fit. You have Zoom to Fill, which will fill up the whole map. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so that'll fill up the whole window like that. And then Zoom to Fit will be more like that. So it changes the size of the view. And if you have to get more finite, like you really have to, start putting in details or line of sight, you can actually expand this out more and use that Zoom to Fill or Zoom to Fit to make it a little larger. So this is what you generally do when you're playing around with these, is you're taking these and moving them around and getting line of sight set up. So it looks like there might be some underground passage here, or it just could be like where the water comes through. Really depends on how you want to set this up, but it's pretty cool looking. So it looks like you can crawl underneath these passages and come along underneath the water, like a waterway. And then, so this would be kind of dry, or it would have oxygen, but then above would be this tunnel that covers this passageway, and then you would be able to walk through and be able to either swim through here, or you can probably walk along this tileway underneath. It's kind of a cool map. So that's just a preview of one of the maps. So let's see what else we have. So if I'm in the images area, and I'm going to come down and let's check out the courtyard. Let's check that out. All right, this is really cool. This is what I was looking for. So when I first started on this Kickstarter, I was pretty excited about this. I didn't even really have the money for it, but I definitely went for it. So this is basically the courtyard. Looks like there's some kind of magic being forced through here. There's two like strange structures here. Some kind of robot slash juggernaut slash titans or something like that. Big statuettes. And then there's, of course, the actual area itself. So that's pretty cool. So that's basically, I'm just kind of looking through the maps that I've imported. Since I'm not intimately familiar with them, I'm going to go through and see what I can get into. So there's some dwellings here. I might use that. There's the archives. There's probably a library. There's a generator room and a temple. Let's take a look at the temple. Oh yeah, that's cool. So again, I'm just going to take the actual starting window, stretch it out from the bottom right corner, and then drop down the toolbar and click on Zoom to Fit. So this is cool. So this is like a raised platform, and there's some doorways that go into these two rooms. And then you have they look like guardian statues. So this would be an interesting one to put line of sight on. There wouldn't be a lot of work here, but definitely things to consider when you're building this. You'd probably use terrain in most cases. So it really depends on what the map is and the function of it. But this one wouldn't be too bad because you don't really have a ton of things that you would really need to do with this map unless you got some kind of concept that's very fancy. So that's not bad as far as trying to get things settled away. So here's some more interior buildings. Let's go with the, let's see, he's got some variations too. So here's a Courtyard Joiner. So this allows you to join two different maps together. So this is what he calls a joiner tile, and if you ever bought his maps, the meanders series, he often makes transitional maps so that when you're using the actual content, they'll connect together and you can kind of blend things together. So here's another passageway. So that's pretty cool looking. So this is his blender. And then you have, let's see, the docks. Let's see what those look like. Oh yeah, this is really cool. So I'm gonna stretch this out from the bottom right corner, and all I'm doing is using the mouse wheel to scroll in, or you can use the drop down tool and hit Zoom to Fit. So if I wanted to do, let's see, so if I wanted to do line of sight or anything on here, I could technically do that, and it wouldn't be that bad because you have this huge statue, which would basically be terrain. You could actually make this whole area where the water is like a pit, and then fill it with an effect for water movement. And then up here on the right would just be open. And then this might be a pillar or a landing. I think it would be like maybe like a little landing or something, or perhaps it's one of these generator type things. So it just depends on how you interpret it. So this could be where the water comes in and they generate energy and power. So it just depends on, you know, what you want to do with the map. But maybe it's also a force field. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. But I really like this top-down thing. This is really cool. So I'm going to use this image, I think, and do a little bit of line of sight on it. It just has its name is calling me, basically, to have this done. Here's a ramp, too. So maybe this line here is some energy that is used to make like a force field. And then here's a ramp that takes you down to the actual docks. And then up above might be a terrace looking down. So that's probably what this is all about. So we'll see. And then, of course, you have the shadow. So if you're working with Fantasy Grounds and you already have shadow built in, you can direct Fantasy Grounds to kind of follow the same format if you want. It just depends on what, how picky you want to be and what types of things you would want to include. So first things first, whenever you have a map in Fantasy Grounds, you want to put your line of sight up and you want to get your grid on and that sort of thing. So the first step is to actually put the grid on the map. So I'm going to zoom in, and this is the medium size map. So I'm going to start with 100. I believe his are 75, but I'm going to double check. So it's important to kind of have a roundabout idea. So 50 is going to be a little small for this map. So I'm going to go with 75 and see what that looks like. Yeah, it's kind of good. It's not bad. It's close. Let me see. I'm going to center this somewhere where I can kind of get a better idea of the scale. Because quite often you won't know the scale. So once I put this grid down, I'm only going to temporarily just use this to position the actual square itself. So let's see what we get here. So there's that, and then I'm going to scooch this over to where it touches right there. And I'm looking at this little area here. So that's not too bad of a movement there. So let's try 100. Let's see what that gives us. Yeah, so 100 looks closer to what you would want for scale wise if you want your tokens to be visible but not be so large where it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go ahead and recenter this a little bit, and I'm going to go with 100. You can use whatever you want, but it's better if you actually knew the scale. And he usually has a note or some kind of README file that tells you what the scale is. But I'm going to go ahead and square up just this little corner here and see what it looks like. So I'm going to nudge it over with this arrow, and I want to see where this ends up, see if it looks kind of kosher or looks right. And then I'm just going to nudge the bottom one up a little. So that's pretty good. I like that because it's the same width, so it's 3 wide here on the terrace, and it seems to line up with most everything. So 100 is a good scale for this particular map and the sizing and such. Now that I have that down, I want to lock it, but before I lock it, I want to change the color. So you don't have to stick with this thick gray line, you can actually change it. So I'm going to go with like a yellow or a green, something that stands out, and I'm going to turn the RGB value, which is the transparency, to where it's not so bright, but it's still visible. Or if you wanted to theme it for water, you can use green or blue or whatever you want to use it for. I think that works pretty good, and it's not as thick and not as annoying as the gray was. And I can actually go up a hair with the map, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Just a hair. So this little teeny nudge here is what I would use to move the grid. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that a couple times. That looks much better. Yeah, so see how this is right here? So it's trying to kind of clean that up a little bit so that it has a little bit more evenness to it, at least in this regard. There we go. So that's better, and that's pretty close. It's not going to be dead on, but it's close enough. So now that we have that down, now I'm going to lock it. So it's important that you lock this so that you don't get anything messed up or out of alignment. And if you notice, the squares are also square on these edges here. So if you want to line things up, hopefully most artists will try to be square with their product. So Chris is usually pretty good, so I'm going to unlock it. And I can go by this corner here and use this as my guide. That's a lot closer. Well, let's see how it looks over here. So that's another thing, is you might fix it one place, but it'll be off in the other. Yeah, that's perfect. And now let's take a look at the scale on the map. Oh yeah, that's definitely it. That's in the pocket right there. So that's good. So that's, you can get your grid set, because that's, once this is fixed or correct, the rest of it will go into place. If you start off on the wrong foot, you're really going to have problems. So you want to make sure that that grid is rock solid and that it's in place and you have it scaled properly, so it'll be a little easier on you, so you're not fighting with it all day. So that's just a tip. Now the next thing is, let's take a look at adding some line of sight. So not a whole lot of line of sight here. I don't see any reason to put anything other than these pillars. Might be some kind of terrain or line of sight. So that's fairly easy to fix. So all I'd have to do is take and put a solid round circle around that. So if I go to the actual line of sight tool, which is this little brick wall, and then I go to the wall symbol, which is line of sight, I'm going to go ahead and grab the circle or the ellipse. Now this doesn't have to be perfect, but what you can do is you can take this and drag it into where you get close, and then you double click. Once you go to the selection tool, you double click, and then you just drag it into place. And that's fairly easy to do. That's real simple. That shouldn't be too hard. If you want to, you can essentially keep everything on this layer. So that means you're going to create, multiple ellipses on this particular map, or you can copy some of these layers of things and move them around. So you don't have to just stick to this, repeating the process. But I'm going to do it manually just so you can see the process. So I'm going to go, again, I'm in the wall tool, I'm in the ellipse tool, and I'm going to start off a little bit to the left and left click and drag until I get a kind of a close diameter. Then I'm going to switch to the selection tool and double click on any of these points, and then click on the center and just kind of drag it into place. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that's so far I've been doing pretty good, just eyeballing it. Takes a little practice, so don't get all mad and stuff when you can't move it or you can't create what you're trying to do, because it takes practice. I didn't learn any of this overnight. I'm still learning, so just be patient with it, and once you get the hang of it, it's going to open up some doors for you for creativity. So now that that's set, now I'm going to go to the next one, and you just kind of repeat this process. Now, if it gets too tedious for you and all these are the same size, technically you could highlight this object. So double click it, and that highlights all these. Then there's a duplicate layer where you can actually try to duplicate this layer, but the problem is it's duplicating everything. So you got to be careful with that, because now I have 2 layers of the map, 2 layers of all these things. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So I'm just going to go ahead and click here and click the garbage can. And that'll get rid of the extra layer. And I need to unlock it. That's why it's not getting rid of it. There we go. So be careful when you copy layers, because it'll copy everything, not just the selected item. So now I'm going to take and start grabbing some more of these ellipses. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and draw them. And this will speed things up a little, so I'm not spending a ton of time on this. And then I'll reposition them. So I'm just going to go in here and lay these out, try to get them close. I don't care if they're right dead on right now, because I'm going to go back and select the tool again to move them. So just go ahead and draw these out, even though they're not lined up properly. And that way you're not spending all day going back and forth between the tools. Okay, so once you have these, let me do this one over here. So I want to treat this one, maybe it's a pillar. So I'll just go ahead and drag this over and call that a day there. And then what we're going to do is go to the selection mode. And now we're going to alter anything that we want to mess with. So I'm going to start with this one. So I'm going to double click, and that'll select the whole shape, and then just drag this over. And I'm going to drop it on here. That's pretty close, but you notice I have this overhang, so I'm going to actually adjust these manually. So I'm just going to single click anywhere that unselects the image, and then I'm just going to start kind of just moving these a little bit. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but what I'm trying to do is kind of emulate this area here where the statue is kind of overlapping the actual pillar. So that's why I'm moving these points. Otherwise, it's really not necessary. But there is your contour, because this whole area up here is going to be terrain. So that's why I did it that way. So I'm going to put terrain up on his skull, and then I'm going to put terrain on the folded arms. So that's how I'm going to handle this. So I'm going to do the folded arms first, and then I will do this head. Something like that. Yeah, maybe I'll put one on his nose too. So there's 3 different layers to step on or whatever, or for birds to poop on or whatever. They like to do that, seagulls. So then again, I'm going to double click on this particular group, and I'm just going to move it over into place. And you see it's not perfect, so if that's the case, you can, if you want to, you can drag these a little bit further out, but you're going to end up spending more time doing that than actually finishing the map. So, if you're making a commercial product, or you're converting a module for somebody, sure, go the extra mile. But when you're doing this for yourself and you're just going to be using it one time, there's really not a big emphasis or need to do this. But I am showing that it can be done if you need to. I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I go crazy. So I have to touch it or something, or I'll go nuts. So anyhow, this is basically how you do it. But just remember that you need to consider what's good enough and what isn't. That's what's going to take your time, is you're going to get too picky and you're going to be spending more time messing around with that than anything else. So again, just double click, and I'm going to move this image into place. And that looks pretty good. I'll move on to the next one. So you're just going to systematically, if you have repetitive shapes like that, you can draw them and then move them in place. You don't have to draw them right on top of the image if you don't need to. So this kind of gives you just an idea of how you want to place everything, and this also gives you an opportunity to get used to the tool. So I'm going to double click here and move this around, and I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to double click and move this into place. So this gives you an idea of some time that you can cut down on, and that's why I went ahead and drew everything first. Well, initially I didn't, but I drew everything first and then moved it into place. It's a little easier doing that than trying to do each one at a time, because then you're switching back and forth between tools. And that's what makes this very difficult to do if you're in a hurry or if you need a lot of work done. You got to be a little bit more efficient. So I might use the ellipse tool on this guy's head, even though it's not a perfect circle. So I would take I'm going to take the terrain tool, which is the Christmas tree, and I'm going to draw an ellipse. And I'm going to kind of just exaggerate it above his head, like so. And then once I'm done there, see, I accidentally drew those because my mouse got away from me. So I just double clicked on all those little circles and hit delete, and that will get rid of those extras. Now I'm going to double click on that structure, and then I'm going to move it into place, and I'll be damned, that's pretty close. So that just shows you that you can do pretty close once you get used to manipulating a tool and practicing it. And then I'm just going to click away, and then you can take these and move them if you want to. But I'm almost saying to just leave it. It's not like you need the entire skull cap, but if you need to move them, you can. So this is what I'm doing now, and like I said before, I'm kind of crazy about this. So I have to have perfect, or I'll go nuts. And I'll go back to it basically after the show and try to fix it. That's how crazy I am. So this is basically, kind of a waste of time in most cases if you're going to be this picky. Here I am being picky, but I'm just letting you know that don't drive yourself nuts like I do, because it's not worth it. I just, want to show you the tool and show you what can be done, but most cases you don't want to mess around with these too much, because there's really no point in doing it. This really isn't going on anything commercial, or it's not going into a module or anything. If at best, it's going to go into one of my games or something. So this is just a kind of a tip for you. You don't need to be 100% accurate, and if you spend hours and hours messing around with these little fine details, you're going to get frustrated, and one of these days you're going to just say, the hell with it, I'm tired of it. And you don't want that. Just have fun with it. Take your time. Don't do it an hour before your game. You need to give yourself a couple days to kind of digest the tool and get acclimated to how it functions, learn all of its little quirks, and then it gets easier after that. If you just think you're going to drop right in and do it, you're crazy, because it takes a little know-how. If you're using, Photoshop or PaintShop, something like that, you probably have a better time with it. But if you've never used a photography program or a heavy-duty photo editor, this might get a little annoying. So anyways, I kind of fixed it. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's got a good start. I think it represents this statue pretty well. So that's that. And now this thing is like a big structure. So I'm going to go to the line tool, and I'm still in terrain. I'm going to start over here on this corner by his ear, and just click here and click there, and just click every so often. And then, like the fingertips, I'm just going to make that triangular. I don't really have to make it perfectly rounded. But this is probably the hardest part, is because it's got the most contour. So I'm just kind of building these around the hands. It's not that big of a deal. You don't have to be super perfect. And you're just kind of making points as you go. You don't have to do every little nook and cranny. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, is just every so often dropping a line down. The less lines you have, the less memory or the work that Fantasy Grounds has to do to recalculate all those points. So even now, I'm kind of getting a little click happy here. But like I said, I'm kind of a perfectionist. It's hard for me to just say, no, I'm just not going to worry about it, because I do worry about it. So I'll sit here and go back later and fix all those and put them in a nice package. I'm kind of complete like that. If I'm going to do something, I want to do it right. It's kind of how I am. It's weird, but it's definitely a thing that I go through a lot. It's kind of an issue sometimes too, because you waste a lot of time on nothing. So just what I'm saying is, cool it, man. And then I'm just going to click on the same points as these red ones, not make any new points, and just keep going around the periphery. And just kind of just give yourself a little time. Just relax. Don't get all weirded out because you can't get it perfect. Now that's a recipe for disaster, and that's generally what I end up with. If you ever watch my streams, when I'm doing this, I get all frustrated, and somebody asks me a question, and I'm like, "Oh yeah," and then I forget where I'm at, and I just get. I guess can't multitask very well is what I'm getting at. So here's the beginnings, and what I'm going to do is come around his ear and then join here and just kind of follow the contour. I'm just going to click on these dots as I go, and eventually I will join up with the other side. So all I'm doing is just kind of getting this thing set. So it just pooped on me. So anyways, I got it close. So if I want to get rid of this line, I think what I'll do is I will draw a line. Well, this wants to be a square. So I think what I'll do is I'll go to the wall tool, draw a line, and then see if it'll let me delete all that. So I'll go back to the selection tool, highlight these points. Yeah, it won't let me take care of that one. So let me see what happens when I delete this line. Yeah, it didn't let me do it. So you can turn off the snap to grid. and you can start moving points around if you need to get this figured out. But generally, you don't run into this as often as you'd think, especially if you're patient and you're getting used to the tool. But this is what the kind of mess you'll get into is you'll see how I have all these 50,000 dots. So that's not what you want when you're doing this. And I will probably take this and move it somewhere so that I can actually connect these together. You see, just moving that, I just created another dot. See, it's what happens. See, I just hit delete, and it made all these other points. So that's where you start getting into the trouble when you make a little mistake like I did there. That's when you start getting annoyed. So see, here's where it happened. It started here. Yep, that's exactly what happened. So it got worse as I went. So you want to be careful with that. So let me see if I can get rid of this. I don't know if it'll let me. Yeah, that just made another point. So you get the idea, though. You're just going to put the terrain around the creature here, or this monster. And then if I double click on that point, it's going to take all the lines out. I don't want that. So if I do that, it's going to take all these out. So you got to be careful what you're clicking on here, because you don't want to get rid of everything. So let me try down here when it started getting goofed up. So let me try doing that, see what happens. Yeah, see, it took the whole shebang out of there. Yeah, that's not good. But nonetheless, it's an easier fix like this now, because then I can just stretch these lines around. So I'll just kind of go like this, and then over here, I'll drag this line up, and I'll take this line and move it over here. So it's not too bad. I mean, you can get out of it, but it's a real pain if you're not careful. And this is kind of what I was getting at is, the more perfection you expect, more likely you're going to have this problem, unfortunately. So I'm just taking these lines and dragging them into place, and then I'll go back and, kind of adjust them as needed. But it's not too bad. I got over that ear. And now I'm just kind of taking these lines and moving them, these points, to a rough kind of a outline here. And it doesn't even have to be this accurate. I mean, I'm just kind of moving points around. So fortunately, when I made the circle, it gave me a lot of extra points to work with. Because technically, you don't want too many anyways. And this is a good way to kind of space them out and utilize them instead of having them all tied up in one little area, which isn't necessary. So I was able to get out of that, and that's not bad. So that actually worked out okay, but just to let you know that you can run into that stuff. And then it can really get annoying if you're on a deadline or something. So just give yourself enough time to learn the tool and get some practice in. So that's basically what it takes is patience, and then a lot of people don't want to do that, so just be careful with that. All right, so the next step is I've done with the statue, I think, for now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a pit, and then I'll make some, probably do terrain here on the bottom. Oh, here's another anomaly that I found. Get rid of that. And then I noticed over here on the right, there's these larger pillars. I don't think I'm going to do anything with those because they're countersunk and they're really not doing anything. They're not harming anything. I might just take and make a platform for the actual dock or whatever. So let's see. So from the ramp up, this is basically going to be your terrain. So I'm going to go back to the line tool and make sure I'm in terrain. And I think I'm going to select and move this point down to here and use that point to kind of use it as a guide to getting me to where I want to go. So I'll start at this point. And I actually have snapped the grid off right now just to start with, but I want to turn it back on as soon as I start this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the line tool and turn on a magnetic click, and there we go. So the reason I did that is so that it actually connects the line. And now I'm just using my arrow key to make the points that I want to make. So we got that, and oops, I just screwed up again. What did I? Oh, I wanted to come over here. Yeah. I think what I'll do is I'll delete that. Yeah, I just hit escape. So to tackle this, I think what I'll do is I'll draw a big rectangle or something like that in between these. I don't know yet. So go to line. There we go. And if I start it here like I was going to, it might cause me some grief. So let's see. I'm going to select it and see what happens when I hit delete. Okay. So I did get rid of that little mess, which is good. Now what he could do is, see, these intersect with that. So that's not a big problem. But what I might do is just take and put the actual platform. Let's see. It's all of this and more. So how does that work? Okay. So this is the dock down here, and this upper piece is basically where the end of it is. So I'm going to take and put just terrain on here because there's really not much else to do. So I'll go ahead and do a rectangle maybe on that. Now I'll just do the lines. So I go to the line tool, I'm in the terrain tool, and I'm just going to start up here on this corner or over here, maybe this where this yellow is. And then I'm just going to draw this over here. And you notice I didn't go, I didn't leave that out. So I'm just drawing in the points and not trying to go right all the way through at the very edge, because I want to see some of that artwork. So I'm going to come back over here, click, and just connect the dots. And I'm on Snap to Grid, so that'll help. So when you're doing this kind of thing, you have to be patient, or you're going to do what I did earlier. So I'm just trying to follow the contour that I made earlier. That way you're not, see, I see it snapping a grid. That's what you want. I think I had it in freehand. That's why it started to act up on me, because I actually made a new line. I just want to use the same points that are already established. So I'm going to let the snap to grid do its job and snap to what's already there. So I guess this would be the more difficult part of creating maps this way, is that you're not going to really understand what it's going to do until you do it. So that's the thing about this, is that there's no actual thing that says, oh yeah, this is how it's going to behave when you use it. It's going to be one of those things where you're going to have to trial and error until you get it down. So looks like there. And then I'm going to come down over here to the ramp. Yeah. And that should be close. And then I'm going to come over here and just click on one of these points up here and here. And then I will make the ramp a separate layer, or something like that. And we're getting close to meeting the end. See, this is what I'm talking about. I screwed that up, but I'm not going to stress on that. That's not going to break anything. Because I didn't give it a chance to snap to grid. So we want to go here, and maybe here, and here. Yeah, I didn't give it a chance to snap to grid. That's why it did that. There we go. Starting to look a little better. What do we got here? So I might go, yeah, we're already kind of in that direction, so I'll just follow this shading here. So we're almost there. So that and like that. And you double click to get out of it. So that's not too bad. I mean, it could have been a lot worse, but this is one level up here. And then the pillars block the light anyway, so, or some of the light. And then you have this ramp that comes up, and you don't really see this until you get further up the ramp. So that's where this is kind of started at. And then I can move this in. Oops, see, I'm in the wrong tool. Gotta make sure I'm in the selection tool. Okay, so take this and move it to here. That's not gonna hurt anything. Yeah, so, I mean, not perfect, but it does the trick. You're gonna have different levels that you can be on, and there's all kinds of different ways you could do this. So that's just a little demo, I guess, if you want to call it that. So you got to be careful with how you lay down the lines and what you're going to do with them, basically. Now I'm going to put a pit around this water structure down here, and then I'm going to put an effect on it. So I think I'm going to start at this corner over here. So I'm going to go to the pit tool and then line tool, and then I'm just going to take this and go to this corner. Come over to here. Come all the way down to this area, because if you fall into the water, you're basically not going to be able to get out. That's kind of what this does, is it blocks your movement so that if you fall down or if you get pushed over the edge, you're not going to be able to see. And that's basically and it's hard to climb out unless you get some help. You can toggle the tool on or off to allow movement. But I kind of like it to where I have to intervene to make the decision if he can climb back up or not. And that can make for some interesting role playing. So don't limit yourself if you're just trying to be lazy and say, I don't want to mess with that. Well, it poses an extra second on you to where you have to either hit shift and drag them through the wall or toggle the switch so they can move themselves. I kind of like it on and off depending on the situation. So I leave it on, and then if I think that it's going to be a bear or it's something I want to deal with, I will switch it as I need it. But I don't normally have it turned off or toggled so they can move through it automatically. Depends on what's going on in the game and such, because I don't want to micromanage everything, but I basically don't want to paint myself into a corner either. Okay, so that is basically the pit, and that's all this water. So everything is on this layer, and now I'm going to put in the water effect. So if I go to the effects tool, and down at the bottom, I'm going to create an effects layer, and it creates its own layer. So now I'm going to select the water tool, and you can see the whole map is like that, and we don't want that. So I'm going to put a mask on. And the only thing I want to reveal are the water parts. So I'm just going to take this whole thing and draw it like that. so that the water starts to move a little bit, and I'll adjust the speed here in a little bit. And then, a lot of people ask, well, how do you make that without making a square? Well, first, square it off as much as you can and cover that area, because that's going to save you a lot of time. So I'll take a long, skinny, narrow thing like that and put it in there, and then I'll do the same for this area. And then I might do it here. So once you get that done, then all you have to do is hit the Alt key or hold it down and kind of draw around your contour. You don't want to be right on it because it actually will pull that image in. And that's all I'm going to do is just, make it to where it goes into these little nooks and crannies. You don't have to do it all in one go. So you're not limited here. So again, I'm just going to go around the periphery of it in case I missed anything, and just kind of make little patches of water until we can get it to move and look right. And then I'm just going to do the same thing around his elbows, and I'm going to go around the contour like a ship and go through here, this little area, and come up here. So you can see some of the water. If you have to zoom into a smaller area, you can. So again, I'm holding the Alt key. I'm not going right up to the edge, hopefully. But if you do that on accident, you can take and cover it up. So it's not the end of the world. But see up here, it's got a little close, so it's pulling in the circle. So what I'll do is go back to the hide tool here. And then I'll hit the Alt key, and I'll kind of draw in this area because I don't want the water tool or the water thing to be in there. So I'm just kind of drawing on the outside here. And that gets rid of it from pulling the structure. So if I go to reveal and I just kind of come up through here and try to be careful where I draw. And you can come up and kind of fix your little areas as you zoom in. But again, this is kind of going a little far. Okay, so once you have the mask revealed, so that looks pretty good, but I'm going to slow it down. I want to get rid of the droplet size, so that way it's not huge. And the horizontal, I change that a little bit. Intensity, turn that down a little, turn the speed down a little bit. And it starts to look more like water instead of a big bowl of Jell-O. And then that's basically you're moving on your water to kind of give it a little bit of movement. Now it still looks a little funky, so I want to make sure that, see, that's the horizontal. I want to turn that down. And then the droplet is like that, so I don't want too many droplets. So probably like that. So it shows the ripples, but it's not too crazy. And then the movement is still, see, that's the intensity. So I want to turn that down to like 10 or something, 9, 6. There we go. And the speed is the motion, and you don't want it way up there. You just kind of want it rolling off the side there. So that's a little bit more realistic instead of having this big Jell-O looking thing. So that's majority of that work is just, putting that in there. And then you have this little platform down here. So once you turn on the line of sight, let's say we're done with it and you want to use it, in an actual scenario. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some lighting on here. So right on his head or somewhere around there, I'm going to put a light. And that might be a beacon or a magic or whatever. So I'm going to go to the lighting tool, and I'm going to click away from anything that I want to, because I don't want it attached to the water or to the dock. I want the lighting on its own layer. So if you just click anywhere in here, that gets rid of the layer selection. And then I'm going to go ahead and click the preset. So I'm going to go with a lantern because that's quite a big area. And then I'm going to click on his forehead or the top of his nugget and select the light tool. Go down to the presets, go to lantern. And there we go. So that light will shine like a beacon. And then everything else, I probably will just leave it dark. So we'll see what happens. So that's that. And now the ambient light outside. So most of this is exposed to the outdoors. So if I turn on the ambient light and go to play mode, let's see what this looks like. So this is nighttime. And you can see his beacon kind of is like the shining light here. This is what it looks like. And then when the players are on the map, that's what they're going to see, unless they have infravision or torches. So that's basically how this thing is set. The other thing is the angle. So in the lighting tool, under the ambient light, you have a directional tool. So you can make the shadow longer or shorter. And then it's at nighttime right now. So then you would just change the direction. So I'm just going to enable the player view. Yeah, so you can change the direction of the shadow from where it's coming off of and kind of match what's already here. That's about all you can do with the shadows that are already baked in. So I'm just going to come over here, back to this. So shadow direction. Yeah. And then the length, we'll turn that down. So it's not that big of a difference, but it does sort of make a difference. And then let's go with Dusk. And you could kind of see more what it's kind of a blend of different things. So you have water reflecting some of the sunlight, which is cool. And then again, I'm going to check out the shadow length. So right now the shadows kind of match, but I'm going to move the direction so that there we go. So that's kind of how they're lined up a little bit from here, from the way the map was drawn. And then the length, I have them all the way out to Kingdom Come here. So, yep. So there we go. So that's the example of line of sight, and I'm using the new meanders Atlantis map. So if you guys were part of Chris's Kickstarter, you'll find the maps, and then I put them in the library, and in the library, or excuse me, the assets, and in the assets is a folder called assets. So in order to use these, you kind of have to think about, how you want to use them. So there's a shark in here that I want to use. So actually this mantis is kind of cool looking. So I'm going to use the Manta Ray. So I'm going to unlock the map again, and I'm going to go to layers, and I'm going to drag and drop this. Actually, I'll do the shadow first. And this is the shadow for the manta. Now that's a pretty big area, this 19 by 15. So I'd only want it like 3 by 4 tops. So there's 3 by 2 by 3. And now I'm going to take and drag this from the tile area and stamp it where I want it to go. So I'm going to have it right here. So that's the shadow. And now I'm going to swap it out with the actual creature. And again, it's scaled down. And I'm going to drop it right on top, or offset it a little bit. So I'm going to go over here. So there's the manta. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the manta and drag it underneath the water so it doesn't look so like it's flying above. So now the manta is under the water, and then the shadow should go under the manta. So you get that distortion effect from the water. And now for the manta ray itself, I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to lock the other stuff because I don't want it to move. I'm going to take and move the manta, so I'm just going to select him, and oops, now I just stamped another one. Okay, so I need to go to selection tool because I was in the stamp tool. And then I have the manta selected. And what I'm going to do is turn off the relative snap because it's snapping to half-size grids. That's not bad. So there's the shadow, kind of the same direction as the sun's coming from. And he's kind of floating around out here in front. So that's basically how you'd use an asset. And then when you're done, you go to play mode, and you can turn off the player preview if you want. And that's basically what the players will see with normal light. So that's kind of cool. So then once you have the manta placed, you can lock it. Now, if you want to use this token as a token, you'd have to put it in the campaign folder, but in the assets folder for the tokens. You'd have to move it over here and make a folder for it, and then assign it an NPC. And then you could get rid of this because it's going to be situational instead of permanent. All right, I think that's all I'm going to do. So that illustrates, how to put it together. Just a fairly simple map. How to use the mask tool to mask off the areas that you don't want involved with this, and then you also, some of the pitfalls you can run into. As you noticed, I had a little bit of problems, but then I have all my layers locked here. And what I could do is organize these in folders, make it cleaner so you're not, messing everything up and got a whole list of things here. So it's just up to you how much time you want to put into it and dedication. But I think that's going to be good for today. This will be up on YouTube, so if you missed most of it, it'll be on our YouTube channel. Just look for